Hey guys, in this tutorial we're going to be building an HTML5 responsive website from scratch. And before we begin, let me just say that this video is going to be geared towards beginners. I've been doing a lot of videos on advanced frameworks with Angular 2 and Vue.js and so on, but I wanted to start to include videos for the beginner. Many of you have probably seen my Web Development 2017 guide, where I made some suggestions about where to start to learn web development and web design. And I realized that I don't have much for the absolute beginner. So we're going to go over the HTML5 semantic tags and HTML in general and build a fairly decent small website for a web design company. Alright, so I tried to keep the markup and the styling as simple as possible. There's no frameworks or libraries, just straight HTML5 and CSS3. Alright, so let's go over what we'll be building. It's a fictional website for a fictional company called Acme Web Design, and it's not the best layout. I'm not the best designer, but I think it looks decent. So it has a basic three color scheme. We have this grayish blue, this orange color, and then the light gray throughout the site. Alright, and it's a 3-page site. I didn't want to make this too long, so I didn't add too many pages. Basically, we have a header at the top with the branding. This is a H1 tag, but it could be a logo. You could easily put an image in there. We have a simple menu with an active state and a hover state. Right here we have a showcase area with a background image that could be easily changed. It has an H1 tag and then a paragraph. Alright, and you can obviously add buttons or other stuff in here as well. You could put a little form, whatever you'd like. Under that we have this newsletter section with a heading and then just a simple request form that they could put their email in. Now this form isn't going to work. We're not doing any back-end programming. It's just just the display form. And then under that we have three separate areas with 3 different images. Now I would suggest using something like Font Awesome and using some icons, but I didn't want to get into any kind of third-party libraries or anything, so these are just straight images that we're going to include here. Alright, so we just have the image, the heading, and then a little paragraph, and then a very, very simple footer with copyright text. Alright, so that's the home page, very simple. I want to keep this really short, so feel free to add more to it if you'd like. So the About page, again, very simple. We still have the header. We're still using the newsletter part, but notice we took out the showcase. And then this is the main area. We basically have a main column and a sidebar. This just has some basic about text, then just a little blurb here on the side in the sidebar. Okay, very, very simple. Services page has the same kind of layout as the About page, as any other inner page that you add. We just have some services, which is a UL, which we'll style a little bit, and then a get a quote form on the side here. Alright, so you can see it's very, very simple. Now, one really nice thing about this is that this is completely responsive. So if I go and I start to make this smaller, so when it hits right about there, it turns into basically a mobile site. Okay, so this is what it would look like on a tablet. And you can see it's laid out pretty nicely. If we go smaller, that's around the size it would be on a smartphone. Okay, so notice that the header has changed. There's no more floats. We have the menu directly below the logo. The showcase area looks pretty nice. The newsletter form, no more floats. We have the header, and then we have the form. The button is now a block that goes full width. These are all lined up nicely. If we click on About, okay, see the newsletter form is nicely formatted. We have the page. Now the sidebar is no longer floated. It's directly underneath the main column. Okay, same thing with the services. We have the UL, and then we have the quote form down at the bottom. Alright, so pretty simple. I think it's a good example for beginners to start to learn how to add the HTML5 semantic tags and a little bit of CSS3 as well. Alright, so if you don't know anything about the HTML5 semantic elements or semantic tags, basically they were created to let the browser know what content is where. So for instance, we have the header tag. Obviously you have some common things that you would stick in the header, the logo, things like that. The nav tag is obviously for navigation. We have the A side, which is for sidebar content, which is basically secondary content. Section, which is the main area, main content. Article, which is used mostly for things like blog posts. Footer has things that you would stick in a footer. All right, so these are the main semantic tags. So you might want to take a look at this page from W3 Schools, which is really helpful. All right, we're going to be using most of these in this template. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to open up my editor. I'm using Atom, which is a really nice open source editor. I would recommend it if you don't have something that you prefer already. All right, now I'm going to just be developing right on my local machine. We're going to create a folder, and I'm going to call this Acme. We'll just call it Acme. Okay, and then we're going to first create our index.html page, which is our home page. Okay, we're also going to create a folder for our CSS files, which we're only going to have one, and then a folder for our images. All right. Now I will include a link to the files, and that'll include the images as well. We're just going to have basically the showcase image and then these three icon images here. I believe, yeah, that's the only images that we're going to have. So let's go ahead and open up the index page. Inside of Atom, I'm going to just open up that folder, which is on my desktop. All right. So let's open up index.html. And with Atom, we're able to just say HTML tab, and that'll give us kind of a boilerplate for a simple HTML file. Gives us the doc type, which is HTML5, our HTML tags, our head tags, body tags. We have the character set, which is set to UTF-8, and then the title tag. All right, so let's go ahead in the title, and we'll say Acme Web Design, and usually you want to have some kind of reference to what page this is. It's the home page, so we'll just say welcome. All right, next thing we'll do is link our CSS file, which I haven't created yet, but we will. So let's say link. We're going to give it a rel attribute, let it know that it's a style sheet, and then the href will point to it. So we're going to say ./css/style.css. All right, and while we're at it, let's create that. So in the CSS folder, we're going to say new file and style.css. Okay, so next thing we should take care of is our meta tags. Now, we're building a responsive website, it's important that we put the viewport. Okay, so the viewport will set the width of the template of the website. So we're going to say meta, and we're going to give this meta a name attribute of viewport. And then that's also going to take a content attribute, and we're going to set the width. So we're going to say width equals, and we want to set it to the device width. Okay, so whatever device they're on, mobile device, tablet, which is, I guess, a mobile device, desktop, whatever it is, we're going to set it to that width. All right, so you probably also want to have some SEO, so you want a description and keywords, and maybe the author. So I'm just going to paste that in. All right, so we have a description. I just said affordable and professional web design. We have the keywords, web design, affordable web design, professional web design. I'm by no means an SEO expert, so I don't know if that would be good or not, but it's just something to have for now. And then the author, you can put that in. I just put my name as the content. All right, let's see. Let me just make sure these are indented properly. All right, so that's it for the head. Let's go ahead and save that, and then we'll open it up in the browser. Okay, I'm using Chrome, and notice that in the tab we get Acme Web Design, welcome. If we look at the source code, everything is okay. All right, so let's go back to Atom. And now we're going to start in the body, and we're going to take care of the HTML before the CSS. Alright, so first thing is the header. So we're going to use the HTML5 header tag, just like that. Alright, and if we take a look at the final product, we have the logo, or the branding, and we have the nav. Alright, so within these elements here, notice that they're in the middle, and you can see there's margin on the side here, or some space on the side. What we want to do is create a class called container that we can wrap around inside of these elements to keep everything in the middle and keep them from going way over to the side, and also to keep them from, you know, being aligned to the left. So let's go ahead and add a div in here with a class of container. Alright, now if you don't know the difference between class and ID, everyone is different, everyone has a preference. Some people don't even use IDs, they'll use classes for everything. But the general rule of thumb is that an ID is for something that is unique. Okay, so for instance, let's just say the showcase area, we're not going to have that showcase anywhere else on the page. Okay, or any other showcase element. We may have it on a separate page, but not in a different element. We're not going to have a showcase here and then a showcase here. So that would be something I would put in an ID, all right, because it's only occurring once. A class, however, is something that you're going to put over and over. So the container we're going to put in the header, we're going to put here in the showcase, down here. So that is going to go in a class. All right, so that's basically how I do it, but everyone's different. Alright, so let's see, in the header we have the container, then we're going to have this branding area. So we're going to put another div, and I'm going to give this an ID of branding because I don't plan to have this anywhere else. Alright, so in the branding you could put an image logo, but we're just going to put an H1, and we're going to say Acme Web Design. And then we have the nav over here, so we're going to go under that branding div, and we're going to put a nav tag. Okay, so this is strictly HTML5 right here, this nav tag. And then in the nav we want a UL, which is an unordered list, and that's what's used for menus. Inside the unordered list we want list items. Okay, so this will be the home link, so we need to put an A tag for the link, href, which is going to point to the page we want it to load, which is going to be index.html. Okay, and then the text for that link is just going to be home. Alright, so let's go ahead and copy that for the other links. So we have home, then we're going to have about, and we're going to have services. Okay, we'll just change these links. That'll be about HTML, and this will be services.html. Alright, so let's take a look at that so far. Okay, so that looks absolutely disgusting, but that's because we haven't added any CSS yet. Alright, so before we do the CSS, we're going to continue to add the markup. Now, if we look at the final website here, after the header, we're going to have the showcase area, which has an H1 and then a paragraph. So let's go ahead and add that. You want to make sure you go outside of the header, and we're going to put this in a section. Okay, so section, we're going to give it an ID because I don't plan to have any other showcase sections. Okay, so inside the showcase we also want the container because we want to contain it into the middle there. So let's say div class container. Okay, so in the container we're going to have an H1, and that's going to say affordable, let's see, affordable professional web design. Alright, and I spelled that wrong, I think. That's why I'm a web developer, I can't spell. So then we're going to have a paragraph, and for this, what we're going to do is grab some dummy text from lorem ipsum, or lipsum.com, This just allows us to generate some of this sample text. So just click generate, and let's grab, let's say, that should be good. Very helpful just to get something out. Alright, so that is our showcase area. Let's see, under that we're going to have the newsletter, but let's just take a look at that first. Okay, horrible looking. Next we'll have the newsletter. That's also going to be in a section. We're going to give that an ID of newsletter. Okay, so again, we want the container. And this container idea, this is you'll see this a lot in frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation, a class that will consolidate everything and push it to a certain width and push it in the middle. Alright, so this is also going to have an H1, and this is going to say subscribe to our newsletter. Okay, and then we're going to have a form. Alright, now obviously this isn't going to go anywhere. We're not doing any back-end development, but usually you'd have something like action equals and maybe process.php or whatever server-side language you're using, but we're not going to do that. So it's going to have an input, and we're going to give it a type. Now you could do text, but we're using HTML5, and HTML5 has really nice input types, and email is one of them. So we're going to use that. We can also add a placeholder, which gives it basically some text if there's nothing in the form. So we're just going to say enter email. Alright, and with HTML5 we don't have to close these off like that with a slash. If you were using XHTML you would need to do that, but HTML5 is much less strict. Okay, then we're going to have a button. We're going to give it a type of submit so that when you click it, it actually submits the form. And let's give it a class because I'm going to want to style this. We'll give it a class of button1. Alright, and then the text for this, we'll just say subscribe. Alright, so that's the newsletter section. Take a look at that. Okay, so under the newsletter section we're going to have the boxes. Okay, so we're going to have these 3 boxes. So let's make another section, and we're going to give that an ID of boxes. And you can call these whatever you'd like. Close that, and inside boxes we're also going to have our container. Alright, so we have these 3 separate boxes, so those will each have their own div. So let's say div. I'm going to give them a class of box because they're not unique. Okay, there's 3 of them. Div class box. Each one is going to have an image, but I'll put those in a minute. They're going to have an H3. Okay, so for this first one, let's say HTML5 markup, and let's just copy this here, put that in a paragraph tag. Okay, and let's just copy the div class box, paste it in 2 more times. For this one we'll say CSS3 styling, and then for this last one we'll say graphic design. Alright, so for the images, I'm actually just going to bring those in to our folder. So let's say img. So if I paste these in, we just have logo brush, logo CSS, logo HTML. Alright, so let's go ahead and add those. So we're going to put it above the heading. Let's say image source, and that's going to be in the image folder, and let's say logo underscore HTML dot PNG. Okay, let's just see if that shows up. Okay, So it's bigger than we want, but we'll resize it in a minute. Let's copy that image. I'm going to put one here and here. We'll change this one to CSS, and this one I believe is logo brush. Okay, so there's our images. Now as far as the markup, we're just about there. We just need our footer. Okay, so let's see. In the footer, we're going to put a paragraph, and we're going to say Acme Web Design, and then copyright. Now to get the little copyright symbol, we can put an ampersand, and then copy, and then a semicolon, and then 2017. Okay, reload, and there's our footer. Alright, so the markup is complete for the home page. Now, I'm not going to go into the inner pages yet. I want to get the core CSS done first. Alright, so let's go to our style sheet. And I always like to work top to bottom. We're going to start with the body. Okay, so let's say font. We'll do font family, which I want to be Arial. And we'll put some secondary fonts, let's say Helvetica and Sans Serif. Okay, so that'll change the fonts. Let's take a look. Okay, and then for the font size, let's do 15 pixels. And we also want a line height, which is the line height is the amount of space between each line. We're going to say 1.5. Let's save that. Okay. Now I want to show you kind of a shortcut we could do. Instead of having these three separate properties like that, what we could do is we could say font 15 pixels slash 1.5. Okay, so 15 pixel size, 1.5 line height, and then put our font styles, just like that. Okay, and if I get rid of that, reload, see we get the same thing. Okay, just shortens it up a bit. Now the padding, I'm sorry, the body, I don't want to have any padding or margins, so we're going to set that to 0. And I want to set the background color. Nope. So the background color we're going to set to light gray. Alright, now we're going to use a hexadecimal value, so we need the number sign, and then the hexadecimal for the light gray that I want is going to be that, F4, 3 times. Save that. And now you can see there's no margin or padding. There is above the H1, because H1s by default have padding on the top and bottom, and you can see the background is now very light gray. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is the container. Now the container is a class. Notice that I have the dot here. When you have a class, you use the dot, the period. When you have an ID, you use the number sign. Alright, now the container, what I'm going to do is set the width. Now I want this to be responsive, so we're not going to set it to a specific pixels. We're going to set it to a percentage of 80%. Okay, so that'll set that. And if we reload, you can see that now it's cut off here. Now I want everything moved to the middle, not aligned to the left. So to do that, we can set the margin to auto. Okay, that'll move it to the middle. And then the last thing I want to do here is just say overflow, and I want to set that to hidden. So if something goes outside of a div, I don't want to have a scroll bar up here. I want that to be hidden, and I want the content to be hidden. Alright, so we'll do that. Now it's good to comment your CSS. This is where I want to put anything that's global that could be put anywhere, such as the container. Alright, next thing we'll do is the header. So let's put a header comment, and we can style the header tag itself. And let's say we want a background, and we want that bluish grayish color. So the hexadecimal value for that is 35424A. So if we go and we look at that, now you can see that we have a background. Now that's a dark background, so we're going to want white text. So we'll say color hexadecimal for white is F 6 times. Okay, so that'll change it to white. Notice the link color didn't change because the links we have to do separately. Alright, but for now, for the header, we're also going to add some padding to the top. We're going to say padding top 30 pixels. And then I want to set a height, but I'm going to set a min height. That way, when it's responsive and the screen is smaller and the text or the menu goes on the next line, we want the height to adjust. So the minimum height is going to be 70 pixels. And then finally, I just want a border on the bottom. So we'll say border bottom, and it's going to be that orange color, which is E8491D. Alright, and we also need to add the pixels, the width, which will be 3 pixels, and then the style, which we want solid. Okay, so there's the header. Now for the links, let's do those. So we want to take the header, and then we want all the links or the A tags inside of the header. We want to make those white. Okay, we also want to remove the underline, which links have by default. So we'll say text decoration none. Alright, I also want the menu to be uppercase, and I don't want to have to do it in the markup. We can actually do it with the CSS by saying text transform uppercase. Alright, and then finally I just want to set the font size to 16 pixels. Save that, and there we go. Okay, so next thing we want to do is we want to make this menu horizontal. Okay, we want it to display horizontally. We also want to remove the bullets. So let's say header, and we're going to do UL for the unordered list itself. Now by default, unordered lists have padding. So what we want to do is we want to make sure the margin and the padding is set to 0. Alright, and then for the list items themselves, so header LI, we want these to float left. Okay, we also want to say display inline. And we're going to add some padding. Now, we want padding on the right and left. Alright, now if we do a single padding property like this, it's going to be top, right, bottom, left. Alright, so this is setting everything to 0. We want the right and the left set to 20 pixels. So this would be the right, because it's top, right, bottom, left. And then this would be the left. We'll set that to 20 pixels. Alright, so let's save that. And now we have a horizontal menu. So the next thing we want to do is we want this menu to be over here. Alright, at least for this screen size. So we need to float. We're going to take the nav. Okay, if we look at the markup, we have the div with the ID of branding, which we want to float to the left. And then the nav we want to float to the right. Okay, so let's say we'll go right here. Actually, we'll go down at the bottom and we'll say header. Remember, the branding is an ID, so we want to use the number sign like that. And we want to float that to the left. Alright, and then I also want to set the H1 of the branding. I want to set the margin to 0. So we're going to say header, branding, H1. Okay, we'll set margin 0. Now for the nav, we're going to say header, nav, and we're going to float that to the right. Alright, so let's save that, see what we get. Okay, good. Now I want to move this nav down a little, so we'll also add margin top, and let's set that to 10 pixels. Okay. Now you know what I actually want to do? I want all the ULs on this website to not have margin and padding, including this nav. So what I'm going to do is actually just use the UL. So we'll cut that, get rid of that, and let's put this up with the global stuff. Okay, so this way all ULs will have a 0 margin and padding by default. Alright, I think that's a better way to do it. So our header is almost done. What I want to do now is I want the current link to have that orange color, and I also want the Acme in our logo or our branding to be orange. So what we're going to do is go down here and let's say header, and we're going to have a class called highlight. So we'll say dot highlight, and then I'm going to put a comma here because we want another style or another property for this style, and that's going to be header, and then a class of current, and then the A or the link within that class. Alright, and then what we're going to do is say color, set it to the hexadecimal value of E8491D. Okay, and we're also going to set the font weight to bold. Okay, and then what we'll do is go to our HTML, and in the Acme we're going to wrap this in a span. Alright, now a span is an inline level element, meaning that it's not going to make it go on the next line. If we were to wrap this in a div, then Acme would go on its own line, and we don't want that. So we're going to add this span with the class of highlight. Okay, so now if we go back and reload, nothing happens. Did I save this? Header dot highlight. I forgot a semicolon there. There we go. Alright, and then we also want the current. Now notice that I have the current class and then the A. I'm not putting the actual current class on the A tag. I want to put it on the LI. Alright, so right here we're going to say class equals current. Okay, there we go. And then finally we want a hover state for our menu. So what we can do is say header A and put a colon hover. And let's make color, we'll do C 6 times, which is a gray color. Alright, we'll also say font weight bold. Okay, so now we have a hover state. So now that the header's done, we're going to move on to the showcase. So let's go ahead and put a comment in here. Let me bring this up more so you guys can see. Alright, so we have our showcase. We need that image, so I'm going to bring that in to our folder. So let's paste that in. And let's go back, and for the showcase, we're going to set, let's see, the showcase is an ID, so we want to go like that. And we're going to set the minimum height. Again, we want it to be flexible. Everything should be responsive. So we don't want to set a fixed height. We're going to set the minimum to 400 pixels. Whoops, what am I doing? 400 pixels. Alright, now for the image in the background, what we want to do is say background dash image. And actually, you know what I usually like to do is just say background, and then we'll say URL, and in here we need the path. Now we're in the CSS folder, so that means we need to go outside of the CSS and then into the image. So to go out, we're going to do // then we're going to go into IMG and then showcase.png JPEG, I think. Okay, and we also don't want it to repeat, so we want to say no repeat, like that. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. Oh, it looks like when I save it, it makes it go to the bottom like that. I don't like that. Okay, now that isn't where I want the image to be. Okay, I want it moved up. So what we can do is after this no repeat, we're going to say 0. 0 is the x-axis, so the horizontal. We want to move it up this way vertically, and we're going to move it up 400 pixels. So I'm going to say negative 400 pixels. Okay, reload, and now you can see it's been moved up. That looks a lot better. We also want to set the text align to center, and we want to set the color of the text to white. Okay, now we'll do the H1 in the showcase. Okay, and we want to move this down, so we're going to add a margin top, and let's say 100 pixels. We're going to set the font size of the heading to 55 pixels, and we're going to set a margin bottom of 10 pixels. Alright. Now for the paragraph, I just want to make that font a little bigger, so let's say showcase P, and we're going to set the font size to 20 pixels. Okay, so that looks good. That's our showcase. Next we have the newsletter area, so let's say newsletter, that's an ID. We're going to set the padding on that to 15 pixels. Okay, all around. Color is going to be white. Background is going to be the same bluish grayish as the header. So that's going to be what, 354. What is it? 24A. Okay, let's take a look at that. That looks good. Now what we need to do is float the H1 to the left and float the form to the right. What I'm going to do is move this up. Alright, so we'll say newsletter. Whoops. Can't spell. So newsletter H1, we want that to float to the left. And then let's do newsletter form. We want to float that to the right. Save it. Okay, now I want to move that form down a little, so we're going to add a margin top of 15 pixels. And then we want to style this the input. So let's say newsletter. Now we could just say input, but I want to be more specific and say the type of email, an input that has the type of email. So using CSS3, we can just use some brackets here and say type equals email. Okay, and we're going to set padding to 4 pixels. We're going to set the height to 25 pixels, and we're going to set the width to 250 pixels. Okay, so that looks a little better. Now for the button. Now the button, remember, has a class of button1, and I want that to be global so that we can use that in other places as well. So let's go up to where we have our global styles, and we're going to say button underscore 1. Okay, so let's see, what do we want to do here? We're going to set the height of this to 38. We're going to set the background to be orange, which is E8491D. Let's check that out. Okay, now by default, buttons have these borders. I don't want any border, so we're going to say border 0, or you could do border none. We're going to add some padding to the left and right. Let's say padding left 20, padding right 20. Okay, and then I also want the color of the text to be white. And that's it. So there's our button. So far so good. Now we're going to work on the boxes area. So let's go down here. Put a comment in here. We'll say boxes. Okay, I also got to put a comment for the newsletter. Okay, so boxes. Let's take the boxes ID, and I'm just going to add a margin top to move it down a little more, so 20 pixels. And then for each individual box, we'll say boxes. It's a class, so dot box. And let's see what we want to do here. We need to float these to the left. Okay, if we do that, let's see what it looks like. Okay, so we need to add a width. Now remember, everything's responsive, so this is going to be a percentage. I'm going to say 30%. Okay. Now what we want to do is add some padding. So I'm going to say padding 10 pixels. Okay, and we want it aligned center. Okay. Now these images, I want these smaller. So what we're going to do is say boxes dot box, and then we want the image inside of it. Okay, and we're going to set the width to 90 pixels. Okay, and the height will be auto as well. Okay. Now the last thing on this page that we want to do is the footer. So footer, let's add padding of 20 pixels. Let's add a margin top to move it down a little bit, 20 pixels. Let's say color, white, background, so background color, and we're going to do E8491D. Okay, and then we just want a text align center. Save that, and there's our footer. So our home page is now complete. Okay, not too bad. So now we're going to create our inner pages. So let's create a new file, and we'll call this about.html, and we might as well create the services page as well. Okay, so let's open up about, and then what I'm going to do is copy everything that's in the index file and paste that in about. Alright, and then we're just going to change some stuff. Okay, so in the title, let's actually just change welcome to about. Okay, we're going to want to change the current class of this list item. I'm just going to copy and then cut that out and put that on this one because we're on the about page. Showcase is going to completely go away. That's only for the home page. Newsletter can stay. Boxes we're not going to have, but what I'm going to do here, we're going to change this section ID to main. Okay, and then we're going to keep the container but get rid of everything inside of it. Alright, so let's save that for now and then just click on about, and it should look like that. And then what we're going to have is we're going to have an article. Okay, another HTML5 semantic tag. And we're going to give this an ID. Let's give this an ID of main, not main. We'll say main call. Okay, main column. And then in here we're going to have an H1. This will be the page title. And we'll give this a class of page title. Okay, in case you want to style that later on. And for the page title, let's just say About Us. Alright, and then under that, we're going to have a couple paragraphs, which we can grab from Lipsum.com. Okay, so we'll just generate a couple paragraphs. We'll copy the first two. We'll paste this in. Now we're going to open up a paragraph tag here, paste that in. Now we have two paragraphs, so we want to go to the end of the first one, put the ending tag, and then start another one, and under that put that ending paragraph tag, just like that. Let's save it, take a look, and it should look like that. Now we want a sidebar on this page, so we're going to go after the article, okay, right after the article, and then we're going to use an A side. Okay, another HTML5 semantic element. We're going to give it an ID of sidebar. Alright, so in here we're just going to put an H3. We'll say what we do, which is just going to be a short text blurb. I'm just going to grab some of this text here and paste that in inside of a paragraph. Okay, save that. And obviously by default it's not going to be a sidebar. It's not going to float. So we need to do that in the CSS. So let's go to Style CSS and we'll put this right above the footer. Okay, let's say sidebar. And it's an A side with the ID of sidebar. And we want to float that to the right. And then let's set the width to 30%. And I'm also going to set a margin top of 10 pixels. Alright, so if we take a look at that, it's floated over to the side, it has a 30% width, but we need this to also float to the left with a width as well. So let's go, let's see, we'll just say, I guess we'll say article, or let's say main call. Alright, so it's article with the ID of main call. Alright, and we're going to float to the left, and we're going to set the width to 65%. Let's take a look at that. And there we go. Now we have a main column and a sidebar. Now I want this to have a dark background. What I'm going to do is set a global style of dark so that we can add that to other things if we want as well. So up where we have our global styles, we'll say dark. We're going to set padding of 15 pixels. Set a background. Set a background of E849 1D. We're going to set the color to white. Let's see what else. Actually, no, that's not the color background I want. That's the orange color. We want 35424A. Okay, and then we're just going to add a margin top of 10 pixels, and let's also add a margin bottom of 10 pixels. I apologize if you can hear my son yelling in the background upstairs. Okay, so now we have this class of dark. So let's save that, and we're going to apply that to, let's see, where are we? In the sidebar, we're actually going to wrap a div in the class of dark. Okay, let's save that, see what it looks like. Alright, so now we can put this, we can apply this class to anywhere. Let's say we want to put this on the second paragraph in the about. We could just put it on the P tag and say class dark and reload, and now we have that, which looks pretty nice. So that's the about page. Next we're going to do the services. We're going to copy everything in the about HTML and put that in the services. Let's change the title. Okay, that's all going to be the same. This class current, though, we're going to take that off of the about list item and put that onto services. Alright, and then let's go down here, change the H1 to services. Okay, we can get rid of the paragraphs. And we're going to put in a UL. And let's give this UL an ID of services. Okay, and then obviously we need our list items. Now each list item is going to have an H3. Okay, so this service will say website design. And we're going to have a paragraph. I'm just going to paste this in. Okay, so we have one paragraph with some dummy text. And then we have another paragraph that has the pricing. Okay, and then what I'll do is just copy this LI, paste it in 2 more times. For this service, let's say website maintenance. Set this to let's say $250 per month. And then this one here, let's change this to website hosting, and we'll change that to $25 per month. Okay, now for the sidebar, we're going to change this up a little. Instead of what we do, we're going to say get a quote, and then we're just going to put a form in here. So I'm going to get rid of the paragraph, and we're going to paste this form in. Alright, so if we take a look at it, we have a form with the class of quote. Okay, we have a div with a label for name, then a line break, then an input with the placeholder of name. Okay, then we're doing the same thing but with email. We could probably change that type to email. And then a message, which is going to be a text area with a placeholder. And then for the button, we're using that same button1 class that we used in the subscribe form. So let's save that and go to services, and there we go. Alright, now we need to style this list and the form because that doesn't look very good. So let's go back to our style sheet. We'll go down to the bottom. Let's go right above the footer and put in a comment here. We'll say services. And UL, I think it had an ID of services. And we don't actually need to style that itself. We just need to do the list items. So put an LI in there. We're going to set the list style to none, which takes away the bullets. We'll set a padding of 20 pixels. We'll set a border around each one with a gray border, solid and 1 pixel, and then a margin bottom, which we'll set to 5 pixels, and then a background, which will be another shade of light gray. So E6 will do. Okay, let's take a look at that. Okay, looks pretty good. Now for the quote form, we're going to go up to where we have our sidebar, and we're going to say a side sidebar, and let's do dot quote, okay, as a class of quote, and then the input. And I also want to do it for the text area, the text area. So let's copy that, put that there, say text area, and then I just want to set the width of these to 90% and a padding of 5 pixels. Reload, and then that looks much better. Okay, so the full version of our site is complete. Now what we need to do is make it look good when it's on a mobile device, because right now it looks like this. Okay, now the way that we do this is through media queries. we can set media queries to basically say that this group of CSS will only work if it's at a certain width, if the screen is at a certain width. So we usually put this at the bottom. Let's put a comment here. We'll say media queries. Alright, and what we're going to do is say, put the @ symbol and then media, like that, so it's formatted like a function. And then we just want to say max width, and standard size for this would be 768 pixels. That's usually around where tablet screen sizes are as far as pixels. Let me just move this up. Alright, so anything we put in here will only be affected when the screen is at that size. So to just test it out, let's say body, and we're going to set display to none, which will take everything off the screen. Save that, reload, and now you'll see that there's nothing there, but if I go past 768, it shows up. So when it hits 768, that's when those media queries will be in effect. Alright, so let's get rid of that. We definitely don't want that. Now, a huge part of what we're doing here is just removing floats, because, you know, if this is float over here, when it's a small size, we don't want that. We want them stacked on top of each other. So let's start with the header. Okay, so we have our header branding. And what we want to do is just remove the float by saying float none. Alright, we also want to align everything to the center. And then we just want to set the width to be full, so width 100%. Alright, so we want that done with the branding. We also want it done with the list items. Alright, so we'll put a comma here. Let's say header nav, and then also the list items themselves, so header nav li. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that, and let's reload. And now you can see they're on top of each other. Now I also want the header to have a little space underneath, so we're going to put another property here for header, and we're just going to add padding bottom, and let's do 20 pixels. Alright, so now that adds some space underneath. So let's look at the next problem, the showcase area. There's too much space right here, so what we'll do is say showcase h1, which is 100 pixels margin by default, but we're going to change it to 40 pixels. Okay, so there's not as much space. So that looks good. Now for the newsletter, again, we don't want this to be float, either one, so we're going to add it up here, put a comma, and say newsletter h1, and also the form, so newsletter form. Save that. Okay, so that looks much better. Now if we go a little smaller than that, you'll see the button drops to the next line. So what I want to do is make that a block so that it's always on a separate line, and then make it 100% wide. So we're going to add newsletter, and we want the button. Okay, so we want to say display block, and we want the width to be 100%. Save that. Alright, and let's also set this to 100% width. I think it's 90 by default. So we'll say newsletter form input, and let's make it so it's the email, and we're just going to set that width to 100%. Let's also add a margin to the bottom, push the button away a little bit. That'll be 5 pixels. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now we're going to move on to the boxes. So each box will remove the float, so we're going to add that up here as well. So boxes.box, save it. There we go. Okay, very, very simple. So now we have a responsive home page. Let's look at the about, see what's going on here. So all we really need to do here is remove these floats. So we're going to again add to this article main call, and we also want to add the sidebar. So a side sidebar. Save that, reload. There we go. Services looks good. You may want to make this button a block as well. So let's go here and we'll put a comma and say quote button. And we'll do the same thing, just make it a block and 100%. Okay, and if you want to do these inputs, we can do that as well. Let's see, we'll just add to this, we'll say dot quote input and quote text area, make those 100% as well. Alright, well, that didn't really do anything. That's fine, that looks fine. Alright, so now we have a responsive HTML5 clean coded website. Alright, so hopefully you guys found this this video helpful. I will put the link to download the code in the description, and thank you for watching.